everyone, I'm Courtney, and today we're going to talk about embroidery stitches. Adding simple embroidery stitches to the fabric of a finished crochet item just adds some pretty definition, and it's a really great way to add a few details. We are going to be working on this flat little swatch that I made, but embroidery stitches can be added to a project that is round or flat. It doesn't really matter. The three stitches we're going to talk about today are the French knot, the chain stitch, and the cross stitch. To start, we're going to make a French knot. So what I've done is I've cut a length of this bright yellow cotton. I'm going to thread my needle. And I'm going to tie an overhand knot at the end. I like to anchor my yarn before I make a French knot just so I know it won't fall out. So I work my needle under a couple of stitches and pull it tight. And that way I know that when I'm making my knot, it won't come through the fabric. So find the point where you're going to make your knot. For now, we're just going to put it right here in this stitch. So bring your needle up through the stitch, pull it tight, and then you're going to take your working yarn, you're going to wrap it twice around your needle. 1, 2. You can go 1, you can go more than 2. I like to do 2, I think it adds a good definition. Then you're going to take your needle and you're going to push it back down through the fabric in an area really close to the hole that you came up through. Don't go through the same hole because you may end up pulling it out, so go right next to it. Just go through a couple strands of your thread, of your needle, with your yarn, and pull your needle right through and carefully guide your yarn through that knot. And you've made a French knot. Let's try that again. We're going to go into this next stitch, pull our needle up, wrap the yarn around twice, then go back down in through our fabric close to where that first needle coming up was. Push it down through, holding your yarn tight, pull it through, and pull your yarn tight. Once more, up, pull it through, wrap it, push it down through your fabric, pull your needle through, pull your yarn through, and French knots. When you're done making your knots, you just weave your end through like you normally would and fasten off. Now we're going to make a chain stitch. A chain stitch is called that because it looks like a chain moving its way across your fabric. Again, you can do this on a flat piece of fabric or in a project that's round. We're just going to do it right on this same swatch. I've cut a length of bright green cotton and we're going to thread the needle. And again, I like to tie an overhand knot at the end of my yarn and anchor it to the back of whatever project I'm working on. So just run it under a few stitches, pull it tight, and go back and do it again. So to start a chain stitch, you bring your needle up through the stitch where you want to start. So we're going to start right here. So bring your needle up through this opening, pull it tight, and you're going to stuff your needle right back down through that very same hole. But don't pull your yarn all the way through. Leave a loop of yarn on the top of your fabric. Then you're going to go into the next hole that you would come in your next row of stitches or wherever you would put the next one. You're going to bring your needle up through your fabric and through the loop of that yarn that you left on the top. Pull it tight, and there is your first chain stitch. Looks like a chain. Now for your second one, you're going to stick your needle back in that hole you just brought your yarn through, behind this closed loop of your stitch. But don't pull your yarn all the way through. Again, leave that loop of yarn on the top of your fabric. Then pull your needle up through the next hole and through that loop of yarn. Pull it tight. Back down through that same hole behind this front loop of your yarn. Remember not to pull the yarn all the way through, so leave your loop on top. I like to use my thumb as a guide. Push your needle up through the next hole and through that loop of yarn. Pull it tight. Back down into that same stitch in behind this loop, leaving a loop of yarn on the top of your fabric. Push your needle up through the next stitch and through your loop of yarn. Pull it tight. Back down through the same hole behind the edge of that loop. Leave a loop on top. Push your needle up through the next stitch and through your loop. Pull it tight. And you would continue working in this way until you get to the end point, or however many chain stitches you want to do. We're going to stop here. So to end this, what you would do is push your needle back down through that same stitch, but instead of keeping it behind this front loop, you're going to go right in front of it. Like that. And pull it tight. And that completes your chain stitch. Then you would fasten off and weave in your ends just like you would for any other project. There's a row of chain stitches. Now we're going to work on adding some cross stitch detailing to this piece of fabric. A cross stitch is just a stitch that looks like an X if you're not familiar with embroidery, and it goes this way and then back. And you can work it in rows. You can find a graph to work onto a thing, onto your piece of fabric. And again, it can be worked on a flat piece or a round piece. It just adds a little bit of extra color and dimension to your project. So I cut a length of blue yarn. I'm going to thread my needle. And again, for this kind of a project, I like to anchor my yarn, so we will tie an overhand knot at the end and weave it through a couple stitches. So to start your cross stitches, you'll find your starting point. For right now, we're going to go right here. And you'll bring your needle up through and pull your yarn all the way through. Then you're going to go into the next stitch above to the right. It's going to make a diagonal. So go into that stitch, pull your yarn through. And we've started our first, this is half of our first cross stitch. Then you're going to go into the stitch directly beneath this top diagonal. Push your yarn in through here, pull it, and you're going to go up and to the right. Down into the one directly below it. Pull your yarn through, up and to the right. Straight down below, up and to the right. Straight down below, up and to the right. Straight down below, up and to the right. And you would carry on in this fashion until you got to the end of that first row that you wanted to make, your first row of your graph or your design. Then to go back to finish your X for your cross stitch, you would go down into the stitch directly below, right where you stopped that run. And now you're going to go up and to the left into the same stitch that your previous diagonal is in. So up, one, and to the left, one. Straight down below, pull your yarn through, up one and to the left one, straight down below, up one to the left one. And you're just crossing all of those diagonals to make an X. If you were making multiple rows of this color, you would go down, straight down below, pull your needle through, pull your yarn through, and you'd go up to the next stitch where those two X's meet. Down one straight below, up to where those two X's meet, down one straight below, up one and to the right, down one straight below, up one to the right, down one straight below, up one to the right. And you'd carry on till your second row was done, and then you would work backwards right across, completing your X's. When you're done with your color, you would simply fasten off, weave in your ends, cut it, and then you're done. Another way to use embroidery in crochet is to add details to the faces of your amigurumis. This is the head of the teddy bear from the Sweet Dreams Teddy Bear Mobile, and we're going to add a nose to it today using embroidery stitches. We're just going to use straight stitches, so it's really simple to do. When you add a nose, you can do it in a number of ways. For this pattern, you have a snout that is a separate piece from the head of your project. I like to sew the snout onto the head of my project first and then add a nose so I can make sure that I always get my nose straight. But according to the pattern directions, you can also embroider your nose to the snout before you sew it to the head. I think that I get a better finished project for myself if I add the embroidery after I've sewn the snout on, so I can make sure everything is lined up. So what we're going to do is thread our needle. I'm using brown yarn for this. And I'm going to tie an overhand knot at the end of my yarn. I think I'll do two, just to make it bulkier. Pull it tight, and then I'm going to stick the needle through the unclosed bottom of my head, and we're going to make the nose between rounds 3 and 5 of this project. Remember, for 1 and 2 company crochet projects, your magic ring doesn't count as a numbered round. So this is your magic ring, round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to make this between rounds 3 and 5. So I'm going to pull my needle, I'm going to shove it through this fuzz, through the lighter brown color of my head, through the fluff in the snout, and through round 3 of my nose. 1, 2, 3. And I'm gonna pull it tight. And see, it's not gonna go anywhere because the overhand knot that I tied is wedged in between the fluff and the brown and the fluff and the snout. So it's not going anywhere even if you pull it really hard. So here we are pulled out, and what I like to do is make sure that my nose stays centered. So this for me is a little off to the right, so I will just move over a stitch, pull my yarn through. And there's where I feel it's much more centered. I I like to make a straight stitch up so I can make sure I have the middle of my head marked. So 3, 4, 5. I'm going to put our needle here, and I'm going to bring my needle right back down through that stitch that I came up through the snout in. Pull my yarn tight, and that'll be the mid part of my nose. So my nose is going to be a small triangle. So what I'm going to do is probably go over 2 stitches, 1, 2, and I'm going to bring my needle into that second stitch from the top, back down through the bottom. I'm going to outline my nose first, so I know how big I want it to be. And there's that side. And we're going to do the same thing on this other side. 1, 2, and bring it right back down through the center. Whew. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'll do now is just fill in these gaps with straight stitches. Move it off to the side a little bit, right back down through that beginning stitch, and pull it tight. Off a little bit to the side, right back down, and pull it tight. Off right in between this middle stitch and that last stitch we just made, right back down through that middle stitch in the bottom, and pull it tight. And the same thing on this side. You can add more or less stitches as you prefer. I like my nose to kind of be a pretty solid triangle, so I probably add more stitches than a lot of other people would. But it's totally up to you how many stitches you add, how broad your nose is. You can make your nose as broad or as skinny as you like. And I'm pretty happy with that. Looks centered to me, looks like a nice little nose. Then to make the little mouth, we will draw our needle down 4 stitches straight down. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to pull that yarn right back out through the bottom of my head. Pull your yarn tight. And there is the nose and little details for your teddy bear. When I am casting off, what I like to do first is, this is that leftover yarn from making my overhand knot, I like to kind of tie them off together. Maybe 3 knots here. Then I kind of weave my end in through this darker brown part and pull it right back out again. And that's how I weave in my end here. And I cut it. And I shove those ends right into the head before I close it up and get ready to sew it to the body. And that's how you embroider a nose with straight stitches. I hope you enjoyed this.